We all know the word. Yeah, you know which one. The one we aren't supposed to say because some people may not agree with it. Yeah, that one. The F word. Feminism. These days, the word feminism is used in America with a negative connotation. It's an indicator that someone is a feminist, a radical man-hater who believes that women are superior and, of course, uses her voice to direct attention to herself. There are, nevertheless, so many different ways to view a feminist. So, therefore, to establish the most accurate description of a feminist in America, we need to talk about the course of feminism in American history, the stereotypes often perceived by those who regard feminism as radical, and how feminism influences us today. Feminism has its roots in the works of Charles Fourier, the pioneer of the word and the concept attached to it. It was originally used in 1832 in the context of Fourier's philosophical French writings, yet was only used in English in 1890. Chronologically speaking, there are four waves of feminism in America, each a resurgence of the same ideals and fight for equal rights. The first wave came with the passing of the 19th Amendment in 1920, but the fight for equal rights really began with the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848. This was the first women's rights convention to be held in the United States. It was planned by Jane Hunt, Mary Ann McClintock, Martha Wright, and, of course, Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, two prominent suffragists. Not only were these women strong supporters of the women's rights movement, but they were also well-known abolitionists. In fact, according to the Library of Congress's account of the Seneca Falls Conventions, many men and women who were prevalent abolitionists grew to support the women's rights movement as well, corroborating their ideas in an effort to make everyone equal. That day, in front of 300 people, Elizabeth Cady Stanton presented the Declaration of Sentiments, a document modeled after the Declaration of Independence, but with a focus on women's rights and freedoms. Many of these ideals were already present in the Declaration of Independence, yet only catered to the rights of men, excluding women from its message. Sadly, these efforts were mainly focused on liberating the rights of white women. And while many of these suffragists claimed to be abolitionists, some of them rejected the 15th Amendment, which gave the right to vote to Black men in 1870. They were appalled that Black men should get the right to vote before white women, which highlights the underlying racism they held. Even the faces of the suffragist movement, in particular Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, later distanced themselves from the abolitionist movement, while Black suffragists fought their own tougher battles. But one remarkable woman carved a path for Black feminists to come. Sojourner Truth's famous speech in 1851 left everyone with the words, "Ain't I a woman?" Because wasn't every woman of color still a woman? Apparently not. Because even after the 19th Amendment was passed, Black women were still excluded and even prevented from voting until 1965. Black suffragists such as Ida B. Wells, Carrie Chapman Catt, and Mary Church Terrell led the fight for Black equality and votes, but are often forgotten or underappreciated for their work. It is important to recognize their fight and efforts, especially considering the racial status of our country today. The course of feminism continued with the formation of the National Women's Suffrage Association in 1869. Almost 45 years later, the Women's Suffrage Parade of March 3, 1913 was held. This impressive demonstration of 5,000 suffragists marched on Washington, led by Alice Paul, Susan B. Anthony, and others. They cleverly planned the march the day before the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson, and since people had flocked to Washington to witness this, it gave them the perfect audience. This parade marked a turning point in the battle for the right to vote, though it was not given for almost 7 years after. In 1918, Woodrow Wilson switched sides to support the women's rights movement and started to increase the role women played in World War I. Finally, on May 21, 1919, the Susan Anthony Amendment was proposed and passed. That same year, on November 2nd, 8 million women voted for the first time. This was the end of the so-called first wave of feminism in America. The second wave surged from 1960 to 1980, with the end of the Second World War and the reappearance of stereotypical housewife roles. While men were gone fighting the war, most jobs had been taken over by women, giving them a taste for the working life. Once the war ended, women were expected to revert to their normal positions, with only 38% of women working in the 1960s. Yet, women did not want to give up the working positions. Can you blame them? The idea of having to live as a domestic and submissive wife angered many women, and this sparked the second wave of feminism. Along with this new fight for women in the workplace came other issues, including reproductive rights, domestic violence, sexual assault, and more. Leading the fight for women's rights was one of the most influential feminist writers of the 20th century, Betty Friedan. Her novel, The Feminist Mystique, became the feminist Bible, the text that is often linked to French feminist Simone de Beauvoir's novel, The Second Sex. In her book, Friedan blames education and media for controlling women, shaping them to be the perfect wife, mother, cook, cleaner, and servant to their husbands. One line particularly stood out to me. They were taught to pity the unfeminine, unhappy women who wanted to be poets or physicists or presidents. They learned that truly feminine women did not want careers, higher education, political rights, the independence and the opportunities the old-fashioned feminists had fought for. End quote. Even though it had only been 40 years, many women had been brainwashed. They had forgotten the history of the powerful men and women who had come before them, who had fought for their rights. So, the second wave raged on and eventually led to the third wave, which is said to have started in 1991 with Anita Hill, who accused Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas of sexual assault. Though Thomas was still inducted and Hill was bashed by the media, the impact of seeing a Black woman stand up against an all-white male Supreme Court sparked a new revolt. In Rebecca Walker's 1992 article, Becoming the Third Wave in Ms. Magazine, she supported Hill, claiming, "I'm not a post-feminism feminist, I am the third wave." Women started to take positions of major political power, with 5 women being elected into the Senate in 1993. The second woman was sworn into the Supreme Court in 1993 as well. Any guess who she was? Yes, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a feminist icon and who challenged gender discrimination and sat on the Supreme Court for almost 27 years. Then, in 1997, Madeleine K. Albright, the first female Secretary of State, was sworn into office, paving the way for Hillary Clinton and others to come. While women gained power, another issue was emerging: reproductive rights, including birth control and abortion rights. This was actually one of the main focuses of the third wave. In 2004, 1.15 million people gathered in Washington, D.C. to protest the Partial Birth Abortion Ban Act, which put restrictions on abortions. The act was not repealed and the protests continued, but the third wave had something the other movements did not have: the youth. Younger generations of feminists joined the fight and brought with them bands, TV shows, and magazines. These fresh voices influenced the media, and new content was produced to reflect the new feminists. This continued until 2012, when the so-called fourth wave started, pushed forward by social media. From this grew the hashtag #MeToo movement, which brought sexual assault and rape to the forefront of the global screen. This fourth wave continues now, as we have a record number of women in positions of power, and, most notably, a female vice president. Kamala Harris is also the first African American and Indian vice president. She has broken boundaries and is, of course, a great role model for women and girls everywhere. But many people regard her as a crazy radical feminist. Which brings us to our next topic: stereotypes about feminists in America. According to Berry College's Women's and Gender Studies, there are 9 myths about feminism. Before we begin, I ask you to remember that to disprove something, you only need one exception to contradict that statement. Myth number 1: feminists hate men. This is often perceived as true because the ideas of the ideas spread by the feminist revolution. Feminists do not hate men because many feminists are men. They support each other. A feminist wants equal rights for all genders, but mainly focuses on the rights of women since they are oppressed. Myth number 2, all feminists are women. This is entirely inaccurate, as I said before. Many men are feminists. In fact, some of the first supporters of the feminist movement were men, even before some women realized that they wanted their rights. Nowadays, it doesn't matter your gender, race, or religion, anyone can support the ideals of feminism. Myth number 3, feminists are angry. While this may not be entirely true, it does hold some value. Feminists are mad, but for the right reasons. Women have been underpaid, underappreciated, and have been subject to all sorts of misconduct for years. A feminist has the right to be angry, but that doesn't mean they disrespect laws and authority because of this anger. Myth number 4, feminists are unattractive and not feminine. The way you look doesn't define your beliefs and ideals or even gender. It is not right to assume anything based on looks. As a side note, there are many beautiful feminists, for instance, Emma Watson. Number 5, all feminists are lesbians. While it is true that many lesbians are feminists, everyone has different views, and the majority of feminists are, in fact, straight, and some may even identify with other sexualities. Myth number 6, all feminists are pro-choice. As I said above, everyone has different views, but it is more common for feminists to support women having the choice, since one value of feminism is that women and men have equal rights, which includes rights to their own bodies. Yet, we must remember that there can be exceptions. Myth number 7, if you are a feminist, you cannot be religious. This is entirely false. There are so many powerful women who are feminists and are religious. A good example is Nobel Prize laureate and Muslim feminist Malala Yousafzai. Myth number 8, all feminists are career women and do not support stay-at-home moms. Many feminists are, in fact, stay-at-home moms. Your job does not determine your ideals and what you support. Being a stay-at-home mom is usually a choice, but it doesn't mean it shouldn't be seen as a valid role. However, being forced to be a stay-at-home mom by someone else is entirely unacceptable. It should be their choice, not someone else's. And finally, myth number 9, feminists don't believe in marriage. Being a feminist should not impact your social life in any way. Just because you believe that women and men should be equal, it does not equate to hating marriage. Many feminists are married. Take our vice president-elect right now. Each of these myths addresses a different part of the feminist identity, bringing us closer and closer to an accurate description. But what does feminism look like today? And how does it influence us? The answer is really quite simple. There's feminism in everything we do, from our media to our justice system. But there are so many other feminists who came before us, giving us the groundwork of our world today. Take Barbara McClintock, for example. Scientist, Nobel Prize winner, and feminist icon who changed the way we see and understand genetics through her work. She discovered a transposable element, or jumping gene, which can change its position in the DNA, creating mutations. As one of the first females in her field, she is also the only woman to receive an unshared Nobel Prize for physiology or medicine. She paved the way for women to come, and without her work, we would not be at all as far as we are in genetics today, which shows how powerful she had to be to combat the stereotypes about women back then. In our time, some of the most influential people in our society are feminists, and the power of their work, combined with their influence over us, spreads the message of feminism farther and wider. Take Harry Styles, for example, a music and social media sensation who has taken this country by storm with his recent cover of Vogue, wearing a dress to combat toxic masculinity. During a discussion about feminism, the singer said this, quote, "People think that if you say I'm a feminist, it means that you should think men should burn in hell and women should trample on their necks. No, you think women should be equal," end quote. He has openly declared himself as a feminist and continues to support the movement to this day. Many others, like him, support the movement and its values. Why? Because everyone deserves equality. So what have we learned? Well, we now know the roots of feminism, the myths about it, and how it has impacted us today. So what is the true definition of feminism? Merriam-Webster Dictionary describes it as, quote, the theory of the political, economic, and social equality of the sexes, end quote. But I think it is much more than that. Feminism is the influential practice of equality and equity for both sexes, politically, socially, economically, and historically. Feminism is the foundation of our society today, supporting some of the most influential inventions and discoveries of our world. Feminism is the strength and power of the people, joining together to ensure everyone is equal, because when everyone is equal, anything can happen.
Thank you so much, Maya. That was so insightful and inspirational. We were blown away how you brought us through the history and struggles of feminism in America. We'd love to take any questions if Maya's okay with that. Um, or, okay, so it looks like we have a question. What inspired you to talk about feminism, and how do you think us as Gen Zers can help in the fight for gender equality?
Well, what inspired me was really um, some of my teachers. I've always been interested in feminism, and I really think it's a topic that should be discussed more, especially given the current situation of our country right now. Many people are against our vice president because she is a woman. And I think that bringing feminism to the forefront of our country's um, view, I think it would be beneficial because then others would see how much feminism has grown, how different it is from most stereotypes. And I think that really it is the foundation of our world. And there's so many powerful women out there who have done so many great things. And I really don't see why many people should have stereotypes against that. Um, and then what was the second part of the question?
The second part was, how would you recommend us as Gen Zers continue the fight for gender equality?
First of all, I think you should definitely educate yourself. Read on the history of feminism, learn about things, and then, of course, teach others. If you want, you write an essay, write an article, and then you can send it to the Gen Z. They may be able to publish it. It's always good to write and, of course, social media as a platform to spread your message. So I think those are some of the ways you can really help.
Awesome. And there's another question in the Q&A section asking if there are any books or articles on feminism that you recommend.
I know that the New York Times has some amazing articles on the Black suffragists that were just published this May because it was the 100th anniversary of the passing of the 19th Amendment. So I think the New York Times is a great resource, especially for learning about um, POC suffragists. And of course, I would love to recommend The Feminist Mystique. I have read the first part of it, but so far it's been an amazing book. And I think it's a great way to learn about feminism back then. So those are some of the books or articles that I recommend. But of course, there's so many things out there. Any books about strong women, I know I Am Malala is an amazing book. And any book about a woman who has made an impact is a great resource for feminism.
Wonderful. And there's another question asking if you think there will be a new wave with the younger generation.
Well, yeah. So I think that the new wave is right now with Gen Z. I think we are the new wave. I know the fourth wave started in 2012, so I really think that we are a continuation of this fourth wave. But I think as of now in 2020, with these new ideals, we have a new generation and entirely new voices. I think that we could be the fifth wave. And as the fifth wave, as Gen Z, we are the future. We are we are going to be the ones to change the world. And I think as part of that, I think that includes feminism. So yeah, we would be the fifth wave. So I think the newer generations, I think there will be new waves with younger generations, but we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maya, for coming on here and speaking about feminism. And that is about what we have today. And thank you again, Maya, so much.